Hey everyone, welcome to Neighbor Science, episode 11 of season 3.
God damn.
It's going to be the last
We're
episode.
more
We're ending on
prolific than
11.
certain British television series.
That sucks, man.
Mm-hmm.
Like,
yeah.
11? What the fuck?
It's not a bad
We
number.
should at least do one more. Maybe I'll do one more.
Look, I have no control over your production here.
Well,
I'm
you said
just
you're
a
busy
guest.
next week, right? So
I'm in Indiana next week.
Okay.
Yeah.
Well, that doesn't mean you can't do a podcast.
Well, yeah, but I also have the shittiest recording options.
Oh, okay.
I mean,
Well,
I can talk to my brothers, but I don't think they have anything either.
fine.
You know.
I guess I'll have to do
What we
another
can do-
solo episode. I'm going to have to come up with a title for that one because obviously the first one was like, oh, it's a solo episode. I'll do a title about it being solo.
What I really want you to do is I'll send you a bunch of shit I would say, and then you just impersonate me.
Okay. Well, I'm already doing that right now, so.
Yeah, that's true. So you're really good at it, obviously.
Yeah. Anyway, that was a really dumb intro.
We are very dumb people.
Yeah.
Yep.
We've already been talking for 20 minutes about just the dumbest
Just
stuff.
how dumb we are,
Yeah,
basically.
and how we're stupid,
we're unprepared
dumb
for this
idiots.
episode, and but Ryan's very
So if you're dumb or if you're smart or anywhere in between,
somewhere in the Goldilocks zone between dumb and
listening.
smart.
because it's about to get real smart in here.
Yeah.
Because today we're talking about Marx and why I'm smarter than him
Yep.
personally.
Yeah.
and
This
why
is
he's
Ryan's
stupid.
personal chaotic quest.
Today we're talking about Marx's labor theory of value. Not to say that he invented the labor theory of value, because that was actually David Ricardo, but Marx was a big proponent of the labor theory of value, and he based a lot of his capitalist analysis on the labor theory of value. And I'm here to tell you why you're all dumb commies and you need to learn economics, because value is subjective.
Sure, Dad.
That actually is technically true, though. I will say that.
I'm not going to argue that fucking point.
We'll get to that later.
I know that already.
So I'm going to talk about labor theory of value.
Well, son, would you rather have 3 bullets or a loaf of bread? Well, if you have 3 bullets, you can rob the bakery. But would you rather eat now or later?
Is your dad Jesse Ventura?
Sure.
Would you rather eat now? Yeah, so labor theory of value and its implications. Also, I'm Ryan Salisbury, and that's Kris Nivens.
Yep.
Those are our names.
Those are names.
Yeah. Doing great so far.
We're on track.
Anyway.
Segue.
So, so me and Peter personally, not so much Kris, have talked a lot of shit about Marxism, and we've laid out a couple of our criticisms of Marxism, mostly stolen from Bickler and Nitzan, and a lot of this, admittedly, is also stolen from Bickler and Nitzan and other economists that I've read, and other non-economists.
These
that I've
are
read.
your original thoughts,
which
totally
were original,
borrowed from Israeli propagandists.
Right.
Yeah.
And this is also part of an article that I started writing. So,
oh yeah.
I'm not going to be as good at reading it as a normal set of show notes because it's written to be an article. But also, I'm basically just workshopping this article.
Sure.
As a podcast.
So we're just going to discuss your rough draft / outline.
Yes. So we're going to be doing editing in person.
So what's really going
live.
on is this is you're suggesting to the head of your program the thesis you want to write, and then the committee is going to look at it and be like, actually, this is shit.
Yeah.
And you'd be like, no, it's not shit. And they'd be like, well, I mean, do you want to graduate? And then,
And then it'll be like, nah, I'm good.
Yeah.
I'd rather just do drugs.
Yeah. Well,
and then
because value is
their
subjective.
bow tie will spin, and then I win the argument.
Yeah.
Because
right.
How can you compete with drugs? You can't. Sorry.
You can't.
Drugs are cool.
Drugs are everything,
hands down, every time.
Yeah, we're primitivists now. All you have to do is just do
like
the drugs. Huh?
Do primitivists like drugs?
Well, I mean,
Pretty sure curing marijuana is technology, so I don't know if you can do that.
Well, I was thinking
So
of just
fire.
the naturally discovered, like shrooms and shit. I thought they were super into that.
If you're a
maybe
primitivist,
the primitivists I know are different from the primitivists you know.
If you're a primitivist, you're
East
only
Coast,
allowed
West
to
Coast beef.
You're only allowed to smoke dirt weed, and you're only allowed to light it on fire started by lightning.
Right. Right. And and so forth.
Just so you know.
Yeah.
Weed is anti-civ, or weed is civ. Sorry.
Weed is civ.
Yeah.
Yeah. If you're a stoner, you're participating in society.
Yeah. Which we live in. We live in one.
We live in society.
Yeah. Anyway, so I'm going to try and start this labor theory of value thing.
Yeah.
So
you've got a beef with Karl Marx.
Right.
Too bad he's dead.
He is dead.
And only spoke... Actually,
it's one of my favorite things about him.
Yeah.
He's dead. Haha. I'm not dead, which makes me better than him.
Right.
Yeah.
Super
So anyway,
bitches.
I'm going to start by trying to define the labor theory of value. For those who don't know. So
be hilarious if you were wrong the first time.
Sorry, the labor theory of value states that you can just make mud pies all day and then that will be worth $1 million. That's what it means.
Mm-hmm. I'm listening.
It's one of my favorite libertarian things.
Yeah, right.
So the labor theory of value states that the economic value, which they conflate with price, so like prices basically, are explained by the amount of socially necessary abstract labor time, which, if I have to mention it again, I don't think I do, but
Snart.
Yeah, I'll abbreviate it as SNALT, which is a fun word to say. So the amount of SNALT needed to realize it, and just because that word is also complicated, socially necessary means like the mud pie thing is bullshit. So if someone spends way more effort than they need to making like a given item, then it doesn't count because it's like the amount of work socially that the average worker would have to put into making something. And then it's abstract because there's no like concrete measure of labor other than like hours, but hours, like 1 hour of labor from one person may not be equal to 1 hour of labor from another person, like whether they're skilled or unskilled. So it's like a really vague thing, kind of.
Yeah.
And Bickler and Netzon get into
it's a construct.
They get into the weeds of like how it's not a unit.
Yeah.
So you can't really measure it. So it's kind of bullshit to say like, yeah, that's what is price is based on.
Mm-hmm.
But anyway, so for example, if a typical factory worker takes one total man hour to make a pen, there's 1 hour of SNALT embodied in a pen, and that's what the economic value of it is.
Right.
So if someone takes 10 hours to make a pen, it doesn't count because the
somebody else
other 9 hours wasn't socially necessary. But in reality, unfortunately, things are not priced in labor hours. That is a thing that some socialists have tried to do, was create like labor notes, which were more like hours, and that was supposed to be used as a currency.
Which, like, on its face sounds about right when you're working with these parameters. You're like, oh, well, in that case, we'll just do like a wage based on time, right? Yeah. And then that'll be
and we actually did an episode in I think season 1 or maybe
I think
maybe
I might have heard
2.
that or part of it.
Yeah, and it was about time banking, which is like a very similar thing where people trade hours.
Right.
But it's mostly only available with services because it's really hard to like convert your entire supply chain to be hours when you're not a state.
Yeah. I mean, the best thing is when people share hours in love time, wage.
You're talking about fucking?
Whoa. What's that?
Share hours in love?
Well, this got weird.
Okay, bye, everyone.
All right.
So anyway, LTV is supposed to represent like relative exchange value. So like if a pencil takes an hour, half an hour to produce, and the pen still takes an hour to produce, then the pen is supposed to cost $1, whereas the pencil is supposed to cost 50 cents because like a pencil takes half as much effort as a pen.
Right.
So there's a lot of issues with LTV, which a lot of political economists have analyzed in extensive detail. For a good overview, you see capitalist power. I think we might touch on it in our capitalist power episodes, but I think we might have skipped over it to like save time. I can't remember. It's been a long time.
Because your argument was weak and you were wrong.
No.
No, go ahead. No, LTV has its weaknesses. For sure.
So, man, I should have just like skimmed this before we started. It's so hard to read.
So we are equals.
Yeah. So the first problem is workers are paid different wages, and those wages are primarily an outcome of a power struggle between employee and employer.
Which is true.
Right, which is why unionized workers are paid more than non-unionized workers, because the workers in the union have more power to demand higher wages.
Right.
Same thing why workers in the U.S. are paid more than workers in China, because there's been a history of labor struggles in the U.S. Where we've got higher wages than workers in China. Although that gets fuzzy because of international money conversion.
I don't know a ton about like the Chinese economy specifically, but I think that has more to do with the fact that they liberalized in what was it, the 70s and 80s, the Deng fucking shit.
Yeah. Communism with capitalist characteristics.
Right. Where they're like, what if we follow the USSR model and go fucking batshit with this?
Yeah.
But then really, really do it. So I think that has more to do with the liberalization of their economy and then like the opening of trade and all that bullshit. And as they decided to follow that kind of liberal economic path, that's what fucking happens is they end up in that kind of economy, and they needed to further industrialize if they were going to compete at all. And so they ended up in that kind of like weird position of having like increasing levels of development and political clout and all that bullshit, which we've seen. And of course, the fucking West likes to be like, oh my God, China, they look different than us, therefore it's a threat. Which sounds like an interesting and familiar argument. And then,
which is stupid, because they're not a threat because they look different than us.
Right. It's because
they're a threat because they're genetically superior to us.
right. Yeah. And their ability to compute things is amazing. And that's also not an essentialist argument. But yeah, it's because like they basically pursued that kind of like liberalization to some extent or other. And we can argue about the extent to which and the forms in which they did that. And they did follow different strategies in doing so, which I thought were pretty interesting, the little that I do know again. But because there was a lot of, there's still a lot of like command economy style, work being done in terms of how they chose to build up and industrialize and innovate and so forth, quote unquote innovate, right? But it was very paternalistic, but while also being liberal, which some people think is opposite, but it really does go hand in hand. Anyway, so of course, like their labor power, which was already, which was like had been empowered, it seems, through like Mao's, rise and everything like that. But then, which kind of had seen some like, I don't know if like the laboring class was like disempowered or anything like that through like the Cultural Revolution, but there was obviously like a lot of like disruptions that happened in their economy because of political projects.
Okay.
Anyway, so then the liberal thing starts to happen after Mao, and
fucking liberals.
Right. Like they're like, well, what if we, and they experiment with that, and then they just go for it. And because they had so much state, influence and support behind that project, like that was a project of the state at that point. And again, China experts can fucking correct me where I'm wrong or vague, and I hope you do, because it is of interest to me.
If you're a China expert, please correct
tell
us so that we know who you are and we can invite you on the podcast.
But this is my understanding based on what I've seen, read, heard. Then obviously, like labor power is extremely diminished by liberal processes, like economic liberal processes. And since the state was accelerating those processes in order to further industrialize, further militarize, et cetera, then the undermining of labor power and of like people's sort of like the people's voice overall was itself also accelerated because of the fucking proliferation of these like unequal structures and stuff, and of the competition that they tried to introduce in order to achieve these things. So as with many of the as with much of the kind of like state communist industrial projects, what you saw was a lot of cool good shit happen for peasants and stuff.
Yeah.
But then also, and this is where I'm kind of like, I try to be a little heterodox in my leftism too, is to understand like how many good things were achieved, many bad things were achieved, and many of the bad things that were achieved were capitalist in character.
Right.
Because or they were like kind of like pseudo-capitalist.
I think you could make the argument that like the USSR industrializing was good for peasants because after Holodomor there was no more famines.
Right.
Famines were very regular in agrarian Russia.
Right.
And then after
They
after
figured it out,
Holodomor, there was no more
basically.
famines.
Right.
But at the same time, you skip ahead like a couple generations, and if you're a poor person in Russia now, you're probably not in a great situation. So like in the long term, it didn't go so well.
And these
and
are
same
all
with China, probably. You know that China stopped having famines
You see
after
this shit in
industrialization as well.
Right.
But now,
That's
if you're
part of the point of industrialization,
if you're a poor worker in China, probably, well, not probably, but maybe you're not in as good a situation as a Chinese peasant,
right?
Other than the dying part,
right?
Well,
right,
dying of starvation part,
right. And this is, I mean, I know that like we can talk it because like I don't want to like piss off my like Leninist and Maoist friends more than we already probably have.
I want to piss off Kris's
Leninist and
Maoist
you
friends.
want to. I know you want to, but I'm like
just his, not mine. Mine are cool, actually.
Yeah, right. And I'm not even talking about like left unity or anything like that. Like I think that's fucking silly. But like
friend unity,
right, exactly. Like I just care about my fucking people, and what they think and like their potentially better understanding of history than mine, right? Because I haven't fucking read everything in the library yet.
Oh, you haven't? Oh.
Not yet.
How quaint.
Yeah, I know. But yeah, like you do see these glimpses of like different like communist or former communists, just places where like in China there was like some shit going around on their social media of some poor little bastard. He was like 6 or 8 years old, rural kid, and he got to school, and like I know that like hard conditions exist in those kinds of places. It's like the North Dakota of China, right? But he gets to school and like he's like fucking hair is like frosted issicles, right?
Dang.
Because he just doesn't like, it seems, right, based on the story that was disseminated through Western media, of course, right? So we're iffy on like the narrative there, but this was shared around China, and the kid is poor and he went through adverse conditions to get to school, and that's not great. But at the same time, I'm not asking for miracles from any
I think it's actually
system,
inspiring.
Right? Well, yeah, obviously, right? Bootstraps for everybody. Anyway, back to the point of like China and like pricing and shit. Like in this case, this fucking long tangent I just went on because I was defending the honor of whatever the fuck regime or whatever.
Dang.
Yeah, right. Which I'm not actually defending, but
Kris is a dangus, confirmed.
I'm not. I swear to God. Oh God. Ah, fuck. But yeah.
Now you're gonna have to follow Potawatomi and and all those people.
Shit. I'm really not. I swear. But. Like I said, right? Like they introduced these reforms and restructuring and all this bullshit, and that's what undermined the laborers to the point that their goods, their industrial goods, and their other like fucking commodities are cheap as fuck.
Yeah.
Right. And of course, China has like a huge mining sector. Right. And that is also well, I mean, like they're hoarding their rare earths as far as I know, and then which is smart, honestly, but.
Yeah, I meant to add to that thread about the Green New Deal and how we're going to have to contend with the fact that if we do a Green New Deal, we're going to have to deal with China having
absolutely.
all of the world's rare earth metals.
They like
and we'll be in a very poor bargaining position.
China is to that rare earths and whatnot as like I want to say like Saudi Arabia is to oil, right?
Yeah.
Where it's like other countries have it and they can do it, but like they're really like sitting on the fucking pile right there. Yeah.
But on the bright side, they don't have a royal family of pedophiles and stuff.
Exactly.
That are,
exactly. That is always a pro.
Yeah.
So anyway, so back to your original point.
Yeah. So
didn't mean to take us so far afield. Sorry.
That's cool. The next two are basically like, LTV really just one. It doesn't really acknowledge how prices are formed in reality, which, almost all economics has the same problem.
It's not perfect.
One thing I wish I had mentioned in the solo episode that I like thought of as I was talking and then like dropped again was like a lot of economic studies are based on either models entirely.
Oh, sure.
Total bullshit. Just throw in the trash.
Right.
Or they look at prices and then they like either reverse engineer from there or something like that.
Yep.
And not enough of them use survey data.
Yep.
They need to go talk to businesses and ask them how they do things.
Yeah.
because that's what you want to study. If you're trying to study capitalism, which is a system that exists in reality, you need to talk to the capitalists and ask, how do you do things?
How do you do things, right?
Why are you doing it this way? Why aren't you doing it that way? And so on. So, like an example that I gave was like, a good or service, like the price of a good or service doesn't necessarily have any relation to the amount of work that went into it. And the example of this is a loss leader. So if you go to the grocery store and milk is on sale, that means it's a loss leader. And the reason they put milk at the back of the store is because you have to walk by all the other shit. You'll see other things on the way that you think that you want, and then you'll buy that, and then they make up for the loss on the milk with the other stuff that you buy.
It's a
especially the beer.
Veritable garden of earthly delights.
Yes.
I mean, the beer is always next to the dairy, which is interesting, right?
Right.
Yeah.
And then the other
frozen
thing,
food, because it's easy.
Yes.
You're like, I could use 300 pizzas, actually.
Yeah. I'm drunk and I need to keep my buzz rolling, and I also probably should eat. That's me in the store. And then the other thing with like accounting is, businesses make more than one good or service. I can't think of a single business that makes only one thing. And
that's fair.
They have a bunch of employees in the company that are not directly necessary for production. That doesn't mean that you can get rid of them. That doesn't mean that they're like parasites or whatever.
Well, there might be one who's a parasite.
Well, yeah.
But they're not employees. Those are the owners.
like middle managers tend to actually do some stuff. They're definitely not as important as workers.
Well, this is my general theory, is that managers need to be downgraded to coordinators and left at that.
Yeah.
And so you just flatten it a little bit and be like, you're just making sure shit runs. That's what you're fucking supposed to do, but you're not going to get any special treatment for that. That's what everybody's fucking doing.
Yeah.
Right? Yeah.
But then even more important than that, you have people like our friend Murphy, who's a janitor.
Right.
Are you going to have
fucking necessary?
You're going to work in filth all day?
Right.
Or repair tech. So you get what happens when your shit breaks? Are you going to learn how to fix every machine that you work on? Don't think so.
Not me.
Because usually a big company will have they usually contract their repair work.
Right.
But the repair company will have 12 techs for an entire region, and they just travel around everywhere because you can't just have one there all the time. They'll be spending most of their time doing nothing. And that stuff has to be included in the cost of doing business and selling stuff.
Right.
And therefore the price, because the product sales are all that you have to generate revenue. Mm-hmm. So you have to take all the costs and what they call it, amortize them, take them and divide them up over time and stuff like that. So just labor alone can't explain the price of a good, because a lot of other stuff goes into it.
Like labor as traditionally understood.
Yeah. Right. And most prices, in reality, according to the survey data that I was talking about, there was a number of studies from the 70s onward, starting with Means and Burrell, which looked at how do businesses actually form prices, and over 3/4 of them in most countries form prices as cost plus margin. So they take the costs that they pay for each product. They take their costs, and then they divide it up by the number of products they expect to sell. And then they assign it like a unit cost, and then they add a profit margin that they want to get, and then that's the price. So there's at no point are they how many socially necessary labor hours are we putting into this, and let's transform that into dollars, and then that's the price. Right. And so the conclusion from that is that the Marxist theory of exploitation, the idea that workers are not paid the full value of their labor, that the capitalist takes a surplus value, that falls apart because prices are not based on labor value. So it has real relation to that.
I think that so I'm a bit of a compatibilist when it comes to these two.
Okay.
I tend to like to approach either just different theories, whether they're competing or not, right? Directly competing or not. As I tend to try to ask do the ideas actually work together? Mm-hmm. How could they work together, right? Because people fucking people who like to think actually think and not just spout fucking lies. People like to think about problems. They have a lot of ideas, and they may have good ideas, and sometimes their good ideas are incomplete, or they're even complementary, or whatever the fuck, right? So, to me, this particular part of it, the calculation of value, it's always going to be relativistic, right? It's always going to be in relation to something else, and that's just how that shit works.
Yeah.
I mean, right. And it also has to do with, like you said, and I think all of us on the left fucking agree, is that it has to do with a power struggle between different roles in the work process.
Right.
The classes, as we like to say it. Typically, owners, managers versus the others. Us. And then there's, of course, all the questions about cops and about other types of people, right? That people may have different opinions on.
Yeah, I decided today that
some people
bankers
think,
are their own
doctors
class.
aren't, and I'm like, fuck you, huh?
I decided today that bankers are their own class.
Yeah, they kind of are, financiers and accountants and bankers
they're
and stuff.
They're very cloistered compared to almost anyone else.
Yeah, I mean, yeah, they're
I just imagine that bankers only hang out with other bankers, or people that are like actuaries and shit, people that are as big of dry boned nerds as them.
Yeah, I'm trying to think, because I know some people who work for a credit union, which is a little bit different, right? But it's still a financial
I'm talking about
institution of that kind.
Managers and above, not necessarily tellers and clerks and stuff.
But then you're still thinking of essentially what we would call a bourgeoisie, right? Of sorts,
I guess.
Right.
Yeah.
So that's definitely
I wouldn't call it that because I'm not French.
right. The city folk, but
the city folk,
right. But the uppers, the upper types. So the cost. So this is where I think these are actually compatible. Is it I know I feel like I understand your critique, and so I'm going to just say the cost to hire the workers, pay the workers, bring it to sale, etc., plus the margin. That's just the accounting version of the exploitation, as I see it, right? Because the cost to fucking do, to fucking hire
but a lot of
the
that
workers, pay the workers.
The whole thing with exploitation is it's not necessary that we do that, but there are some parts of that are necessary to do, like the repair techs and the janitor guys. They're not directly involved in production, and technically it would be exploitation for them to be paid out from the value of the laborers' income, because they're not directly contributing to the production of the thing. But they have to contribute in order for the thing to be produced. So it's this fuzzy area between labor and exploitation.
Okay, are you talking about the difference between commodities and services here, or
no,
just let's get into it. Right?
if you use a machine to make a box,
a fucking box, or
whatever,
a pen, or whatever the fuck,
and it sells for $2,
right? Because you spent 2 hours on it.
Yeah, and you make
wild example.
$25 worth of boxes an hour.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm a repair tech, and once in a while your machine breaks, and I have to make some amount of money myself. So you pay me $5, the equivalent of let's say $1 an hour. So you make only $24 an hour per box, or out of boxes now. I make $1 an hour out of those boxes. Am I exploiting you because you're not being paid the full value of your labor? Because you're paying me out of that, even though I'm not a boss, so I'm not getting that because I'm forcing you to give it to me.
Well, I think you're mixing up exploitation versus coercion. I mean, coercion is when you're forcing someone
Well, exploitation is what they call the surplus value being given to the boss.
Yeah.
Or whatever. So I'm getting surplus value as well, but it's because there's a material need for me to contribute to your production process, even though it's not actually making products.
Okay. Are you talking about the manager gets that surplus?
No, I get the surplus as a repair tech.
Oh, now you're the repair tech.
Yes.
Okay.
I've always been the repair tech.
Oh, okay.
Even before this podcast.
Oh my God.
Before time was time.
Jesus
I was
Christ.
the repair tech.
This is how they get you. Okay. So you're the repair tech, and you're performing socially necessary work, fucking labor, right?
So basically, I'm a person that's necessary to the production process.
Yeah.
That's not actually contributing, like in terms of like I'm not putting boxes together.
Right. But you are
But
necessary
you do have to
to
pay
that
me because
happening.
otherwise you wouldn't be able to make boxes. But it's not because I'm your boss and I'm saying like you can either pay me that or I fire you. It's your machine's broken. Well, I can fix it for you, but I need money. You know.
Yeah, that's how it should work.
Right.
Yeah.
But
if
according to
somebody's
the
just-
labor theory of value with exploitation, it would be like this weird gray area where I'm like, according to the labor theory of value, I'm technically exploiting you because I'm not putting labor into the product, but I'm getting paid from the revenue generated by the product. So you're not receiving the full value of your labor because you're paying me. Does that make sense?
Are you still the fucking repair tech?
Yes.
Hey, who am I now?
You're the laborer.
I'm the laborer. I don't
Yes.
pay anybody shit. I'm the laborer.
You make the boxes.
Yeah,
you
I'm
get the $25 an hour.
Right.
And then you pay me $1
Well,
an hour
theoretically.
to repair your shit.
Yeah.
It breaks once an hour, and I only charge $1 because I'm nice.
Well, I mean,
And see, I do in the article. If you were to actually read it, which
if
you didn't, so
I
that's-
read it
that's
as much
pretty
as
rude,
you
I think.
did, as you wrote it,
you would see that I say that the only thing like the theory of exploitation that's correct is that the organization has to receive more in revenue than it spends on labor in order to profit, which is really just a statement on what profit is. And I also think the labor theory of value has some truth to it in the sense that like there is a labor component to any cost. Like any cost ultimately resolves to you have to pay someone to work to do something.
Yes, this is where I was headed until you became a repair tech.
Yeah. Oh, sorry.
That was never born and will
really
never die.
Needed a career change. Anyway.
Yeah, so I mean that's what I'm saying really is that there's like, the cost and the price are all essentially relative, just like, in any system, like the fucking, not to get into fucking exchange values right away, but like the alleged exchange value that they might quote unquote base their price on, like that's based on other prices, and those are all set by other things, and those, it's a fucking, fluid nebulous system, right?
Yeah.
Either way, right? But all I was really getting at was that like, I think that like the Bickler Nissan
BNN.
BNN thing is really just more like the kind of attempt to address like the accounting side of that kind of relationship, and it doesn't change the fact that there's exploitation. It's just reframing it in terms of the cost and sale and margin and all that bullshit, which is just standard.
Well, there's a thing that
business terminology.
There's a thing that people do when they defend Marxism, especially from like this kind of thing, which is
that they build tanks and invade Eastern European countries.
They also do that. Yes.
Okay.
But you'll say like, okay, if we take the technical definition that Marx gave of exploitation, which is that workers do not receive the full value of their labor according to the labor theory of value. Therefore, the labor theory of value is, or the theory of exploitation is not correct. We'd be like, oh yeah, well of course. I mean, we acknowledge that, and like here's the reality of it, and this is what we believe. But it's like, okay, but I'm not attacking what, like the thing that you believe personally. I'm attacking what Marx said, and what the scientific theory of socialism, according to Marx, or the scientific theory of Marxism, according to him, is, which is that there's that prices are determined by the labor theory of value, and that workers are exploited, which is a technical term, which means they do not receive the full value of their labor.
Right, because a lot of it goes to the fucking
the boss,
the administration. Exactly. Yeah. Right. The managers, owners, etc.
Yeah.
Right. So what's wrong about that?
What's wrong about that is that's
literally what happens, right?
What?
Yeah, the fucking quote-unquote value, right? In this case, some monetary amount extracted, if you will, accounted from, right? What they're able to sell this shit for, right? The value in that paradigm fucking floats to the top, and the laborer gets, a stinting amount, right?
Yes.
And the managers and owners take the fucking cream.
Right.
That's
again,
the
that's
point.
just a statement of profit. That's just saying what profit is.
Yeah, but
it's not.
Then why are you arguing about it?
But it's not that. Well, what I'm arguing about is the scientific theory of it, which is a very specific quantitative idea, which is the exploitation is the worker produces a certain amount of value according to the socially necessary abstract labor time that goes into a product, and the difference between that amount and what the worker actually gets is what exploitation is, and that's what the problem is with the process of capitalist production.
So basically, okay. So basically, what you're saying is what I think any good, scientific-minded person would say is that the two values cannot be sufficiently or effectively quantified such that you can make any kind of functioning equation out of it. Versus we can address observe and describe the fucking price.
Yeah, you can describe
thing.
it qualitatively, but not quantitatively.
Right. Sure. Well, as I said before, Marx was more of a philosopher than anything else. So,
right.
Yeah.
But there are numerous people who insist that Marxism is a scientific theory that it's quantitative.
Okay, I mean
all that stuff.
Right. We can talk about
and then this
claims.
goes into other stuff because there's other things that are based on the labor theory of value in Marxism that have other implications, which we'll get into after we talk about the power theory of price, which is that basically, in a nutshell, since we've already been going for an hour and 15 minutes.
God damn it.
But prices are the outcome of two power processes. One we've already mentioned, which is that one power process determines the cost of materials and labor needed to realize a good or service. It's based on the bargaining power between laborers and employers, and sellers of intermediary inputs and the buyers of those intermediary inputs. And then the other power process determines the profit margin the seller is able to add to the cost. For example, a product can be made more expensive if it's organic or if it's unique or something like that.
Right. And that gets right into literally mainstream economics. With the supply chain value chain.
They're even wronger about it than Marx is.
Well, right. So, yeah. Here's a graph that I diddled with my dick, and it's a bunch of overlapping areas, and the most overlappiest is the part where for sure what's going on, and then it's totally wrong. Yeah.
I mean, the mainstream economic explanation of price is one of my favorite examples of pseudoscience, because it's
ridiculous.
Okay, so price is formed by supply and demand.
Myself in class
but
over that
also, you're only supplying one good, and also there's only one buyer of the good, and also there's only one seller of the good.
Yep.
And also, everything about the buyer and seller are known to each of them, and there's no mysteries in the universe.
Right.
And that's how it works,
and
guys.
presumably all of the things they know are basically uniform.
And the product is output. It's not it's not an actual product. It's just output.
It just kind of suffuses. Yeah.
So, since we're just talking about Marx for now, I'll skip the implications of the power theory of value, even though they're very interesting and you should read them. I'm going to link the article in the show notes or in the description.
Before we move on, a break.
Time? Okay. So we can argue some more. Bye.
Yeah.
Kris is upstairs, so I'm just saying that I'm right about everything, and he can't even defend himself, so you have to accept that what I'm saying is true. Now, I definitely didn't say anything while Kris was upstairs.
Nope.
Anyway, so the next part is wow, I just put Marx's theory
Marx's
The heading
theory.
of this is Marx's theory, which the rest of the article doesn't even touch at all, unfortunately. But
Who's this guy again? What did he...
Karl Marx?
Karl Marx.
Who's that? So Marx's theory of value, which is based on the labor theory of value, and his theory of money, are maybe one piece of why Marxism and anarchism are not that compatible.
Right.
Which, some people think that they are compatible, which is fine. I'm not here to argue that they aren't. But according to him, according to the things that he said, they aren't. So you guys are actually wrong.
And he's obviously the only authority that we have access to.
So labor theory of value essentially treats prices as a reflection of objective reality. Again, we didn't mention this more than once, I think, but according to the labor theory of value, prices are all relative to one another. So the price of a pen compared to the price of a pencil,
right?
As long as the socially necessary abstract labor time that goes into each one remains the same proportion,
more or less constant,
relative to one another,
right,
then their prices should be the same relative to one another.
Right.
So his theory of money is the commodity theory of money, which if you don't know, it's a conception of money that says that money is just a commodity that emerged as a good thing to trade with. It depends on the barter theory.
Yeah, this is true. This is a weakness that I agree with.
Yeah.
You on
So basically
money is
we
such
started off bartering stuff.
Weird thing. Yeah.
If I wanted chickens, I would trade you a cow for 50 chickens.
Right.
And
then this thing emerged that was an
this
intermediary.
really smart guy one day
commodity.
was what if we use money instead?
Why's it got to be a man? Why's it got to be a man, dude?
Oh, that's true. Yeah.
Yeah.
And I definitely was imagining a white guy that did it too. So
of course you were.
I'm racist and sexist, unfortunately, and transphobic. So just not doing good so far. So I think that means I lose the argument. Actually,
let's just delete the whole episode.
So, sorry everyone. I guess Marxism wins. There was no point in you listening to this.
Cheers, Marxists.
But anyway, so the commodity theory of money is that through barter we discovered that some things have a value that everyone values, as opposed to food, which everyone needs, or water, which everyone needs.
I don't need those things.
Air, something like that.
Air is
any of that stuff.
Nominally important.
Sunlight.
Not important.
Yeah, gold is actually the thing that everyone
extremely
needs,
edible.
Which,
yes,
everyone has a use for that. I have tons of uses for gold. I use it all the time.
Yeah. Fuel my car that I don't have. Yeah.
There are other commodity money systems people traded nails, which again I use those every day.
Yeah.
Feathers, cowrie shells,
Salt.
female slaves. That one I do use constantly.
The female slaves.
Yeah.
I mean, they're the backbone of society.
Yeah.
They built our civilization.
My girlfriend thinks I do the dishes, but in fact my female slave does all the dishes. So.
I'm giving you some shady side eye right now.
So
the moment where there's a good cop.
Yeah. So we all know that the commodity theory of money is bullshit because we all use credit cards and debit cards, and obviously none of those are commodities.
Right.
We're not numbers. Banks aren't swapping commodities when we pay at Target,
right,
and all that stuff.
Yeah. This is the interesting thing about, I'm not even a money theory guy, right? But just the fucking...
It's so important.
I know, right? But literally the fucking the prep for the 101 of this kind of shit is the commodity theory of money is so interesting because I feel it's the same level that libertarians actually operate on.
Oh,
I'm
absolutely.
sorry, Marxists.
Yeah.
Because I actually like you better than I like them. But
all the ones that are against the Federal Reserve Bank are absolutely commodity theory of money people.
Because they're well, this is a good, it's a commodity. Yeah. I need to have it.
It has to have intrinsic value.
Right. Which is very mercantilistic too.
Yeah.
And
there's a podcast called Money on the Left.
Oh yeah, right. Yeah, you mentioned that one. And I started listening to the
thing, and they had a woman on who was talking about theories of money, and for the longest time I was okay, well, obviously, like, the commodity theory of money is just nonsense. It's not true at all.
Yeah.
There's no evidence for it whatsoever. But, like, why, even if it's not true, like, why was money always, like, gold or silver?
Right.
Because that's what it's trying to explain, really. It's like, okay, we have all these examples of money, and it's
but why did
mostly
they stick
gold
to that
and silver,
shit?
sometimes
Yeah.
copper.
Yeah.
But it's mostly gold and silver.
Yeah.
And,
Tended to be, yeah.
and her thing was like, if you issue a coin and it's made of gold or silver, then it's sort of like collateral. So if the money fails and you have a bunch of it, then you can melt it down and sell it to recoup some of your, whatever, your investment or whatever it is.
That's an interesting idea.
Yeah.
And of course, this is obviously like metal fucking coin.
Yeah.
Okay, that kind of makes sense.
I'm stupid in getting set in my ways, so I'm just going to assume that that's true without looking into it at all and confirming with evidence.
Because why complicate things?
It makes
with
sense. So
facts
it's probably right.
and yeah. No, that's an interesting idea. I would love to read more about that one.
Yeah. I think she had a book, but I absolutely cannot name it offhand. So.
Yeah. Well, I think. I mean, again, money is weird, and complicated, and abstract, and like. I like to talk to people, who don't think about it much, about how like money is a publication of the state or of like a state of a state affiliated organ of some kind, and so as such is essentially like money is almost, I was going to say literally, but that enters into other metaphors. Money is basically like a figure of speech.
Yeah.
Like money is like a way of expressing the values that we have already kind of alleged are subjective and not really calculable, except that they are when
value
you
is
set
subjective,
those things.
price is not.
Right, exactly. Right. And so the money is kind of like the medium for which, like by which power and that power struggle,
Money is a symbolic representation
not calculates,
of power.
but declares. The relationship between the two.
Yeah, the way I put it is like, I wrote a whole section of chartless theory, but we could just get into it early if you want to like totally ruin my flow, and that's fine.
Hey, that's your fucking choice.
Just kidding.
We can do 2 more paragraphs.
But basically, like, money is like the delegation of power by the state over these states' subjugated workforce.
Yep,
that's the way that I put it, and then I need to come up with a more straightforward way that would be understood by anyone. But I think that's
money
like the
is
simplest
how
way.
You fucking bribe people to keep doing things and believe they did it on purpose.
Okay,
kind of.
I didn't follow that exactly, but if I read it
it's
written
just
down,
another kind of like
better.
other side of the relationship.
The other thing
go ahead.
I define capital this way, but I think it would probably also apply to like money in general. It's permission by the state to use their subjugated workers.
That's actually a fair way to think about it.
Yeah,
and of course,
so every dollar that you have gives you. Like it depends on the wage of the person, but say someone makes $9 an hour, you have $9. That means you get not 1 hour of that worker's time.
Right. Yep.
And it's somewhat voluntary.
Well, I think,
today we have enough subjugated workers that if you need someone to do something for $9 for an hour, you'll probably be able to find someone to do it for you.
Yes, exactly. And the interesting thing about like if like the size of like the money market, if you will, is going off of what you just said about money being kind of like a state license to command a certain amount of labor, per document, right? Per bill, which is like a legal fucking script,
A bearer instrument.
Right. Bearer instrument. Anyway, so then you have, your $9 or whatever the fuck. And like in the more archaic, like less sort of markety or capitalistic or whatever else economies, there was a variety of ways you could trade your goods and so forth. And this is one reason why like very like mainstream economics obsessed or like money obsessed people like libertarians think that we've made so much progress is they're like, oh well, we've just like sealed up all the gaps with fucking money market and other instruments and financialized everything, but that's just bullshit. But in the old days, in any given system where money was present, like the state, or some powerful entity, like we went over in Kokudaka in Japan, there were like the daimyos could also issue or at least control the flow of monies, and say like we're going to pay you in this, and you can trade it for stuff or services or whatever, and like the less you have circulating, the more it was sort of explicitly that permission or that license to sort of essentially mobilize labor.
Yeah.
Right. Or the goods that came from the labor.
Right.
And now, because we've increased that number, the amount of quote unquote money in circulation. Right. And we've adopted this market ideology that everything's in the market and all this stuff, then, the exchange values of money itself sort of smear, right? As well as the exchange values between goods, services, labor, etc.
Yeah, that almost makes me think that the market is really just the existence of a sufficiently advanced state to the point where like everything, like all life means, are being provided by people that are part of the state.
Essentially.
Yeah.
Yeah. Essentially, that's what it is. That's the financialization part. Yeah.
So it's almost
they're
like
just saying like we now control your relationships.
Yeah. If a state continues to proliferate, it will inevitably create a market because it just has to.
Yeah. Well, if it's sufficiently interested in that kind of control, it will develop the instruments and the means by which to proliferate and regulate those instruments. Right. So they don't want to regulate businesses, but they are very interested in currency exchange, monetary policy, etc., because that's where the fucking real shit is. Yeah. Right. The who's who in business and the what's what with labor, to them that's just like, that's just the fucking ladder. But what's real is the ladder itself, which is money and things like that. Yeah. Right. So that was a tangent.
Okay. Let's see what else do I have. So I had a section on chartalism here. I can't remember how much we've talked about modern monetary theory, but just to go over it briefly, you can get a really good. There's a really good reading of it by David Graeber in Debt: The First 5,000 Years, where he talks about how money emerged. How it started as credit and not as like commodity money or bearer instruments or however we think about it today, but it actually started as credit and then later became currency. And he talks about the chartalist theory, and it's coming back into fashion thanks to modern monetary theory, which incorporates like central banking into it quite a bit. But any state basically issues currency in order to give to its employees so that those employees can get provisioned by people that are outside the direct employment of the state. Right. So the example used over and over in debt is standing armies. So in order to raise an army, they would pay soldiers, they would give them coins, and then they would go somewhere. And then wherever the soldiers were, they would demand taxes from whoever was living there and say, like, you need to work for these coins because if you don't pay them to us, then we're going to murder you or whatever. Pretty much, yeah. And so that means that they would provision the soldiers. They would, give them shelter and food and all that stuff. And today that's evolved into central banking. So... Yay! Yeah. So I think even though it's hardly ever talked about in the context of like what capitalism is, I think it's actually an extremely important part of capitalism because it's been there basically since the beginning of capitalist history. So the first central bank was the Bank of England, formed by the English Crown in 1694, which was basically created in order to mobilize the construction of a world-class navy. So they lost a major battle against the French, and the English have a really, long-standing dick measuring contest with France. And
very long-standing.
Yeah,
very, very long-standing.
They looked in the mirror and they saw that their dick was very tiny, very, very tiny indeed. And so they created the Bank of England in order. It's basically like jelqing for the Navy. So Charles Montague, who was the Earl of Halifax, proposed what would be the Bank of England. He wasn't the first person to propose the idea, but he was the one that actually made it happen. So a bunch of investors lent £1.2 million to the English Crown in order to form the Governor and Company of the Bank of England. And I think it'd be cool to do an actual entire episode on that, because what does it mean for these people to lend £1.2 million to the government? How does that work? I don't know. And we should get into it now, because that would be we would just be talking out of our ass.
Yeah, pretty much. Just
but I do have a footnote here that's pretty interesting about the first person who proposed the Bank of England. It was a financial intermediary to the Crown, and an investor in the East India Company, who we will be talking about in the next season for the episode on the history of sugar.
Yes, sugar.
Named Philip Berlamacci. And he actually had another symbolic victory besides the founding of the Bank of England. He had another symbolic victory of financiers over the English Crown when he lent £70,000 to King Charles I, who later went bankrupt.
Well, Charles, he had some issues.
Gotta live within your means, buddy. What's wrong with you, man?
All right.
Buying too many cigarettes and beers.
All right. God damn it, Charles.
That's your problem.
All right.
You got to work hard, impress the boss, and climb up the ladder.
One of these days.
And then one day you'll be able to afford cigarettes and beer.
That's right.
Not today, bud. Sorry.
That's right. Sorry, Charles the First. You're
spending too much on avocado
gonna
toast.
Stay in the nosebleeds. Avocado toast.
I definitely need to reorganize this article, but anyway, so the next section I get back into the idea of the full value of your labor, and part of the other problem with that, and I think probably a more devastating problem than just the specific scientific theory, the quantitative theory that Marx states, is workers don't actually produce any value initially, because they don't start working until a business owner gets capital to pay them with. So at the very beginning of a company, it starts with the capitalist. The capitalist has capital.
Right. It's initiated by,
and then he hires,
started up, as we like to say.
And I say he because capitalists are men.
Right.
Let's be honest.
Right.
That's a bad thing.
Yeah, we're just trying to be objective about
the
tendency here.
Yeah. So the capitalist hires workers to do something, and they start doing it, and it'll probably be a while before they even start getting revenue. It's usually a couple of years before a business is, maybe not usually, but it's often years before a business even starts producing revenue, and they're just starting from the capital that they are founded with. But meanwhile, the worker is getting paid. So is the worker getting paid, the part of their value that the boss isn't exploiting from them? No, they're getting paid from the capital that started the business. So
okay, I see what you're saying.
Yeah, so workers never actually earn any amount of the value of their labor. They're paid wages out of the capital supplied by the business owners. And so the wages of the workers are determined in advance of any production happening at all. They're paid in advance of production happening. And so it's really not the exploitation part that's the problem at all. It's just the entire relation of capitalist and worker,
Well, that's definitely true. Yeah.
Yeah. And it's not just like specific to capitalism. Like, so, you know, in the capitalist mode of production, as Marxists call it, the capitalist is granted permission by the state in the form of capital to use the state's subjugated workforce for their own ends.
Right.
And the problem with that is that there's a hierarchical organization that stems from the state, which determines the level of freedom and access that the worker gets.
Right. Yep.
And so if you're a capitalist, you get, you know, infinite freedom and access. You can have basically whatever you want.
Right.
You can do whatever you want.
Right.
There's a great article that I read like years ago. Maybe I should try and find it, but like they're basically talking about how like you know, we're all subject to like customs and passport enforcement when we go to travel.
Yep.
But you know, ultra rich people, they have private planes.
Oh yeah, they basically just waltz in,
walk out onto the tarmac, get into their plane, and just leave. They don't have to do any of that bullshit.
Yeah, exactly.
You know, you can be Bill Clinton and get into a plane and fly to Child Rape Island with Jeffrey Epstein and do whatever you want.
That's in the South Pacific, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
I don't know.
I mean, we'll have to Google it.
Yeah. Yeah. Go on Google Maps and Google Child Rape Island.
and
you'll probably find
how that goes.
I think in the indigenous tongue it's called Rapa Nui.
Oh God.
I didn't even intend for that to be a pun or anything, but I think it kind of works as one.
It's sort of we're getting there.
Yeah. Anyway, so what we really want is for workers to be free and to have access to things rather than being enslaved and immiserated.
Yes.
So that means that like a hierarchy of so-called proletarian government bureaucrats that are granted increasing levels of freedom and access depending on their rank in the government is fundamentally the same thing as capitalism. So even if you don't have like whatever characteristics you give of the, you know, capitalist mode of production, if you still have a state, then that's still the same problem.
Right. And this is right. So yeah, essentially, in this critique, like the dictatorship of the proletariat, as conventionally understood by many people, right, is just a repetition and a permutation of forms of the state throughout history, but just with like new like levers, incentives, and ethics.
Yeah, exactly.
Right. Which that itself is its own topic that I think is worth discussing at some point. Because I think I was thinking about this actually.
That's like
I was obsessing
I've
over
been trying to figure out for like years now.
Yeah. I think that like, and I'm not going to sound like an extremely good anarchist right now, but like, it's one of those things where it's kind of like social democracy, where you're like, okay, well, if like state communism takes hold, and that's what we got, I can work with that. You know, I can work with that
for sure.
Right.
Like, being a part of the Soviet Union, if you take away, I guess if you take away the purges and stuff,
purges and the pogroms,
those are bad.
Yeah,
but like if you were a worker in the Soviet Union, it was definitely way better than being a worker in any capitalist nation,
right?
Especially outside of the United States,
right? So that's kind of where like I see this particular style of like state communism that is again like conventionally understood according to these terms as like maybe on par with a lot of the attempts that we've seen at like social democracy, quote unquote, right? And all that other shit. Because I'm like, I don't think it goes far enough. But like, as we just said, it's livable. Maybe we'll see who wins out.
It's a very fine line between like, okay, like being in the USSR is a little bit better than being in the US, and like slave master logic where it's like, oh, well, you know, your circumstances were shit before I got a hold of you.
Right, exactly.
And now they're better, so you should be happy with what you got.
And that's always a hazard, right? Yeah. And that gets into like, I'm sure that, you know, our cosmist insurrectionist friend would be like just, you know, happy to really get into this kind of thing. But like, that's the sort of weird like psychosocial stuff that is always like historically embedded and very like path dependent and contextual, you know, where like whatever the fuck you do right, somebody's going to be like, you should be grateful to me, you know?
Yeah.
Like that paternalism or that like kind of just like
and that's even where debt comes from too.
Shit. Oh yeah, like the debt shit, you know.
Oh, I saved your life. That means you owe me now.
And you're like, well, maybe, but maybe it was just like we were both in the same place and you were doing me like what any human would do, you know, like. So that's the kind of situation is like,
or you weren't doing what any human would do because you were telling me that I owe you.
Right. Maybe you did this literally thinking that now you have a slave. You know. So who knows? But yeah. So that's the thing about that is like there's a lot of moral hazard in any given system of governance, and that's I think what anarchists are trying to avoid.
Yeah. And so I summarize this as like we want to put an end to the atrocities carried out by the state, not to reconfigure the logic for carrying out the atrocities.
Right. And that's a solid summary for I think the main point at least.
Yeah. So man, we're both getting either drunk or tired or both. I think it's both.
Well, you know, probably both. Yeah.
Yeah. You have your metabolism thing. I have my I don't sleep very well thing.
Yeah. Well, I also don't sleep very well, so I'm just fucked. I'm just generally fucked. Yeah.
So the last thing I have is, and this is not a complete article. I just decided to do this as a episode because our other subject wasn't done, and I didn't want to just do like bullshit. So
let's do it.
It's the last thing I have, but there will be more in the future, I think. So this is about ownership of the means of production. And this is like the big thing.
What's that?
It's the big thing that Marxists are concerned about.
Right.
So according to the Marxist definition of capitalism, it's private ownership of the means of production. Sometimes also like commodity production is included and some other stuff. What's some other stuff that tends to be included in the definition of capitalism by Marxists?
I mean, that's like really the main one, yeah.
Alienation, I guess.
Alienation.
Yeah.
Fucking commodity fetish.
Commodity fetishization, yeah.
Yeah, and just general fetishization, like, fucking...
Which...
Obviously, like, the class system, right, that is proposed by Marx and Engels, like, to sort of describe, like, how that all works, and, like, criticism of, like, the nuclear
and let me make
family.
sure I'm getting this right. Commodity production, according to Marxists, is production for exchange value and not use value. Is that what that is?
As I recall...
And then alienation or commodity fetishization is that social relations are mediated through commodities rather than through direct social relations.
Basically, yeah.
Yeah.
Basically, yeah. And like masked, right? Like so it's like it becomes smoke and mirrors.
Right.
Right. Like mediated, but like in an unclear,
right, you're like
and
disconnected from.
Right, it's a sort of fantastical.
Also part of alienation. Like alienation is
everything
the
becomes kind of
disconnected from the product of their labor.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. Like you're not actually, like you don't think about like the pen that costs $1, right? You don't think about the pen necessarily as just a pen
because you're not getting the whole $1.
Well,
and you're not giving it to the person.
Yeah, it's more like
using it.
Right. It's more like you didn't make it, they didn't make it, you got
Someone
it from
didn't
them.
come up and ask you for a pen and you make it for them.
Right.
You make the pen and then you sell it to whoever you don't give a shit.
Right.
And it's not even you, it's your, right.
So if you're
your
like
boss's salesperson.
Right, exactly. Yeah. So it's like if you're and all the like all the weird like flawed and sort of mystical thinking that comes with that kind of relation to the products that like you don't like quote unquote like own the means of production of, and all the other shit that goes with that, like the relations and so forth. And so like even if like let's say like you're a guy making a pen in a factory for in this bizarre example for an hour but then like so you
wish I could make a pen faster than 1 hour.
right well
seems like every pen takes that long. Right? Damn.
Well, and of course like a traditional economic or a traditional industry maybe you make one pen at a time and you do it, and of course this is the whole
I'll actually make 5 pens at a time
line.
So just a little better
with
than
all
you.
5 hands. And then on the sort of assembly line, etc., the sort of the industrialism paradigm. Ugh, God damn it!
Industrial paradigm.
Yes, fucking shots. Okay, so
You want to take an outside break for a second?
sure, why not?
We can back up a little bit. Okay, and we're back to attempt the last part of the show. Is this my beer? This is my beer, right?
Yes,
Going good so far. Okay, so we're gonna finally talk about
failscience.podbean.
Yeah, if you like our podcast, it's on failscience.podbean.com.
Yeah.
So ownership of the means of production. So according to Marxists, private ownership of the means of production is like the primary and most important characteristic of capitalism. That's like how they define capitalism. Most of all is that the means of production are privately owned. Mm-hmm. But I think that describes just any state system.
Yeah, that's something that I kind of like grapple with a lot too.
Yeah,
is like what's the separation between state system, like statism or state whatever the fuck, and capitalism as a system. And I think that like it goes into our general view, which is that they're inseparable.
Yeah,
but not that like capitalism is like eternal. That's
right.
kind of a new modern thing, but it's essentially a statist system.
It's a type of statecraft.
Yeah, exactly.
I think.
Right.
And as I mentioned, I think central banking is like one of the most important characteristics. I think it's much more important than
because it's in the middle, and that makes it important.
Right.
Central banking.
Yeah. Even though central planning doesn't work.
Right. Can't do that.
So technically, it's not capitalism, actually.
No.
And I think I mentioned in the last episode that like the source of legitimacy is also an important characteristic of capitalism, because prior to this, it was always like the emperor or the king. Granted, it was the ultimate source of legitimacy.
Right.
In capitalism, the government lends legitimacy to a lot of institutions, but also just like, especially nowadays, like the idea of merit, where someone either they worked hard for what they got, or they produced something that was socially important, and that's why they have the right to control it.
Right.
Mark Zuckerberg invented Facebook.
Yeah.
And so since he invented Facebook,
that's
and everyone
improved
uses
their
it,
fucking lives.
yeah. So since he invented Facebook, that means that he gets to control everything with Facebook.
Right.
And I can't remember what I was reading, but there was someone else that was talking about this, where like I think it actually might have been Capitalist Power, where like if a company changes hands, why do the workers obey the new boss? Like for example, I worked for Caribou Coffee, and it was acquired by JAB, which is a German holding company, and then they decided to make all the Caribou stores Pete's stores. Right. So why did we go along with that?
Go with it.
Obviously, because they pay our wages.
Right. I don't have any other choice.
Yeah.
So I'm already there.
Yeah. And then just like property rights and like acquisitions are just considered like, if someone pays the money to acquire something, then it's theirs, and they're the legitimate ruler of the thing.
Right.
So it's not because they owned the espresso machines or anything like that that we worked on. They own the stores, but the stores aren't like, they're kind of means of production, I guess, but they're not really. Like, it's just the building that we produce in.
Right.
It's not the means by which we produce the coffee. It's the locale that we produce the coffee in, or something.
Yeah, something like that.
I don't know, but it's very fuzzy. It's another one of those things where it sounds really clear and easy when you first think about it, but then the more you get into it, the less clear it is.
Say, well, what about these exceptions and these scenarios? Yeah.
Right. And so like if you push on this, like I've brought up the what's his name? David Ellerman critique of means of production, where like the example I always use is Foxconn. So Foxconn workers, the Foxconn company, they own all these factories. Mm-hmm. They are the ones that own the factories where iPhones are produced, yet Apple is the one that's in control of the production of iPhones.
Right.
Because Apple
this
pays them the money that they need to do it.
This is where you lost those followers. I remember now.
Oh, okay.
This is the thread that you went off on. And people were like, no, this guy is full of shit, actually. But I know kind of what you were saying, so I want you to elaborate for everybody.
Yeah.
Including myself, because I'm curious.
So the Marxist response to this is like, okay, sure, like, I guess, Apple is in control of the production process, even though Foxconn owns the means of production. But really... it is actually the means of production that puts capitalists in power because, if we controlled the means of production, then we would be in power.
Right.
But the problem with that is, like, even if the means of production were, like, completely publicly owned, if, say, like, factories were just opened to the public, sure, we could produce everything that we need, and... the capitalists would have like less power over us, or the state would have less power over us. But still, if they were to levy taxes on us and say, if you don't pay the taxes to us, then you're going to go to jail, then they still have power over us, and it's still a state because we would still have to work for them and work for their ends and fulfill their whatever it is that they want, even though they don't own the means of production. It's really the threat of violence that is the ultimate power that maintains the control of the state.
I half agree with you. And by that I mean I agree with the threat of power, monopoly on violence thing, because that's basically accepted as far as I'm aware. At least there's very broad, wide consensus on that one for what what it means to have state power. The monopoly on like the legitimate use of violence.
That's Weber, I think, defined it that way.
As I recall, yeah. Or someone who looks exactly like him, but yeah. But in my like when you think about like what that would mean practically, because we're kind of going down this rabbit trail. Say you own the means of production, right? And so.
But have you ever owned the means of production on weed?
No shit. I'm sure a lot of people have. Then
we know for a fact that Richard Branson does.
Yes, absolutely, yes. And it's been verified that Elon Musk can do it. Though weekly so.
I really want to come up with like a term for the face that he made when he smoked that joint on.
Fuck.
Or didn't even smoke it. He just took a taste of it.
Yeah. That was something
the
else,
like eyebrow
man.
raised.
Yeah,
like,
just the like scrunchy face thing.
It's like the nerd new experience thing.
Yeah. Like,
like yeah, okay.
Yeah. I'm actually 60. But yeah, like if you own all that shit somehow or other, like if you control it, and then the state's like, we're going to tax you and we're going to use force to like cause you to give us some proportion of that value, some amount of what you produce, then you, at that point, if you have actual control over those means of production, right, then like theoretically, as I think the idea goes, the attempt by the state to controvert your control is going to be severely diminished. Like you'll be able to defend that theoretically,
right? Yep.
Because you'll have mass power and all that, right?
Yes.
So that's where like I mean, you and I and most of our clique are fans of dual power.
Yes.
Right. We love that shit. I fucking love it.
Yeah.
And
I fuck it sometimes. Making it awkward again.
Well, me too. Okay, so dual power, cool. As in whatever form that might be. And then there's the whole like seizing the state power,
season of the bitch,
right. Celestial seasonings, whatever the fuck it is. Yeah. So the idea being that like at that point you've achieved a kind of dual power very, very suddenly in some sense of the word, right? And so you're able to compete with the state violence, yada yada. So I don't see a problem with that so much. I think that like you have a fair point about like the taxes and the violence and all that shit, like the top down state imposed shit.
Yeah.
But I just don't see that it's all that much of a different objection. Like it's not like a significant objection to Marxism versus like any objection to like an anarchist theory.
Yeah, I guess it's really an objection to the definition of capitalism as private ownership of the means of production.
Okay, well, I mean, in that case,
if that's what Marxism is, then
right.
that's what I object to. And if that's not what Marxism is, then I guess I don't.
Then sure, right. I mean, yeah. In that case, if we're talking about what we kind of referred to before, where like capitalism is under in our understanding more of like a modern mode or means or method of control and dissemination of power under current state regimes, right? Then in that case, sure. Yeah.
And I do say at the end of this is the last thing I wrote before I had to start working again today, which is like, is control of industry pointless? No, it's not.
It is pointless because time will erase all lives.
Time.
Our names will be forgotten.
Pointless.
The dust will blow over our corpses.
Everything is pointless, actually.
Everything
not
is pointless.
Just control of industry,
except for that $1 fucking pen.
Yeah. That has a point.
That has a point.
And so does
it's
the
a
pencil.
ballpoint.
So does the pencil as well.
Yep.
So like control of industry puts us in the position to break state control without either risking opposition from non-political people who need to eat or risking mass death from starvation or exposure or disease caused by us not having the ability to produce our needs.
Yeah.
So, control of the means of production is important for sure.
Yeah, absolutely.
And we should acquire it
Yeah.
in order to
Quickly
do the revolution
immediately.
thing that everyone wants to do.
We should do that.
But again,
Preferably tomorrow.
as we've said before, part of that is doing businesses and getting control of industry through our infiltration into business.
Yes.
And then using that as part of the dual power strategy.
So basically,
That's really all I'm saying.
Google.com/socialism.
Yeah. I think that's our URL.
Or something like that.
I think you have to do google.com/s ? No. Google.com/search ? Q = business.
My God.
This is a good bit to do. It's me trying to guess
Just
the URL.
building a fucking query.
Google search.
That's a good bit.
So that was really the whole point of this episode.
The whole episode.
Yeah, we were all just getting to
as
the
deflated
Google query.
and long-winded as it was.
You can really ignore the rest of it. Other than that, so that's really all I have for this. There's more in the article. There's very flowery, pretty language in the article, but not in a hard to read way. It's in a nice to read way, I think.
Hopefully,
That's what I'm shooting for, anyway.
everyone was listening to this podcast episode
I'm
as
so
they
sorry
were
for you,
lying
but-
down to sleep,
Yeah.
and by the time
You're
we say
hearing-
any of this, you've completely passed out.
Yeah, you're hearing our exhausted voices and just drifting off into dreamland.
Just goodbye.
Oh, I think I need to move the mic around for that. This is the ASMR
Yes,
Political
yes.
Economy Podcast. Actually, that already exists.
Oh God.
There's a guy that's like into capitalist power, and he also does like ASMR videos.
Jesus.
And yeah, he did like ASMR economics, where he explained all the concepts of capitalist power, but he was whispering.
Oh my God.
So he did them like this. He talked about inflation and mergers and acquisitions. And I think he rustled some paper while he was explaining capitalist power.
Jesus Christ.
I'm gonna have to amp the shit out of that, but it's gonna be worth it, I think.
Yeah.
So I think that's all we have. Do you have anything else
this
you want to talk about?
journey seems to have come to an end.
We're gonna be cutting probably like, I'm probably gonna cut like 40 minutes out of this.
90%.
Yeah.
90%.
So I mean, like, this will be our last episode for the year with us together. Is there any like year in review things that you want to talk about? Maybe. Any like particularly important events that you think we should mention?
Well,
like, reiterate that were bad or good.
Let's see.
I would say the left in England is doing better now because
yes,
the Conservatives are very split. I think Brexit was extremely effective in dividing the right.
Yeah, I was just listening to I was literally just listening to Dead Pundit Society episode on that last night. I don't know how people feel about that podcast.
Is that the one with that one dude? Is that the one with the two Australian people?
I think so. I mean, there's
Amy
a few.
Therese and
yes.
Okay, yeah. I definitely hate the guy from that. He sucks.
Really?
Yes.
Well,
I don't like him at all.
There goes at least part of our cred with maybe one person. I don't know.
Amy seems okay.
She's all right. I don't know.
I enjoyed her on. I think she was on Grub Stakers, and it was good.
Yes, she was.
Yeah.
I was listening to the Dead Pundits Society, and then I listened to the Grub Stakers and Rupert Murdoch, which she was on.
Okay.
Kind of just connecting the dots between the two.
Mm-hmm.
It was actually a pretty good episode. They were talking about like some of the logistics of all that, and how like I forget the fucking guy's name, the American accented guy. But he was talking about like issues of balances of forces and balances of power, which is a very international relations kind of thing, as well as kind of a leftist thing.
Yeah.
So that's always nice. And that's where I was like, yeah, like this is the part of, say, like conventional electoral politics that I can climb back onto, because it does concern issues of like the powers that literally indeed exist right now.
Yeah.
Right. And so it was pretty good breakdown. He had his guest speaker and everything. That was good. So yeah, Brexit and all that bullshit.
Yeah, I think the lesson from that is that any wedge issue that we can find where we can
absolutely
like, make a referendum happen.
I wholeheartedly believe in that.
Like,
yeah.
As soon as I heard about the vote,
yep.
I was walking Fenway, my dog, and looking in the group DM that we're in, and I was saying like we should like get a referendum on NAFTA.
Yeah,
and that would absolutely divide the right in the U.S. Because half of them would be like, no, of course we need to stay in NAFTA.
Right.
It's good for business.
Yep.
The other half would be like, oh no, we're nationalists. We want America first.
Yep.
We don't want to give up free stuff to Mexico or whatever.
Yeah, no,
even though it doesn't, it's very favorable to us, but they're fucking stupid, so they don't know that.
Exactly. Well, and you know how it is with people's ideology, their tribalism, etc., blinding their ability to analyze something in material terms. You know? So, like, the nationalists really don't understand, or maybe
anything?
just don't care. Well, yeah, but like they don't understand the extent to which the certain kinds of trade do benefit them. Certain kinds of, because it's like if they don't give a fuck, right? If they don't give a fuck, about other people, right, being nationalists, especially like sort of populist nationalists, whatever.
Being conservatives,
right? Yeah, exactly. If they don't give a fuck about anybody else, then what they should be doing, and this is literally something that I told, and I do apologize to everyone for what I'm about to confess, but it was somebody who has literally no fucking power at all. what I told a guy I know who is basically fasc now, but was at the time more of a libertarian, and we know how that works. But I was like, look, here's the thing. America's a fucking empire. If you want the most benefit you can get out of that, you got to treat it like a fucking empire, right? Plain and simple. You just got to double down on it.
Yeah.
You know? And so he went full fucking nationalist after that, and I was like, God damn it.
Didn't expect that, huh?
Right. But I was like...
it is a 50-50
yeah,
chance
it really
with libertarians.
is. Like, I was just like, you know, you can see the point that I'm trying to make, or you can just go, okay, actually, I do want to fuck a bunch of brown people.
Yeah.
You know? And he went the second route.
Yeah.
Which is unfortunate.
That's cool.
Right. So, and of course he was extremely into Trump when that came up, but like...
Yeah, that's the problem is, you know, everyone likes to act like Trump is a big bumbling dumbass, which he is.
Right, totally.
But he's also an extremely strong leader with a powerful brain. And I think even if we brought up the NAFTA referendum, even if that was made a thing, they would just go with whatever he says, even if he says both things.
Yeah, that's the other side of that, is the strongman thing.
Yeah. But then I guess no, like well, okay, so if we were just like, hey, President Orange Cheeto Mick Small Hands, what do you think about NAFTA? If he just had to answer the question, he would just be like, boo.
Hasn't he historically
if we forced
shit
a
on
vote
NAFTA?
on it and like it was like, okay, 50% of the country is for NAFTA, 50% of the country is against NAFTA.
Right.
Let's just say that's what it is.
Yeah.
Then he would have to come down on one side of the vote, and then that would be like kind of on the record. And I don't know. I think that's kind of what messed up the Tories, is like half of them had to come down on a side.
Right.
And they can't just change sides because it's this ongoing thing. Like,
right.
Okay, we voted. I guess the thing would be like, okay, we voted to leave NAFTA. Right. And then Trump is like either, oh no, I support NAFTA, which would be no good for him. Or, okay, yeah, sure, we're going to leave NAFTA. And then we have to like figure out all this shit to do. Because all these things depend on NAFTA being in place.
Right, exactly.
And then, you know, people get mad because he's not doing it well, or they get mad because he's doing it too well, or what have you, and that kind of divides the party. I think we have to find a wedge issue like that and make it a process that has
not just one.
That the government has to go
like
through.
3 or 4,
as many as we can.
Yeah,
really.
Yeah, 30 or 40.
You know, should Jews be allowed to be in government?
Right.
You know,
should there be a
we
Jewish
vote yes, and then
referendum
all
on
the
that?
Nazis are like,
Right.
well,
no,
that's not okay.
Right.
So, think of some wedge issues for the New Year's.
Yeah.
Instead of New Year's resolutions.
New Year's wedge-olutions.
Yeah, New Year's wedge-olutions.
For the revolution.
That'll be an episode titled New Year's wedge-olutions.
Perfect.
I like it.
We'll come back with that one.
Yeah. So we're dying now. We've been dying for like 40
extinct.
minutes probably.
Yeah.
So
you're already passed out. It's fine.
If
we
you
understand.
enjoyed this episode, God bless you. So check out our other episodes. You can find us on neighborsciencepodcast.com. I got that right for the first time ever, which is cool. Give us a rating on iTunes, but base your rating on like the previous several episodes, because those ones are good.
Yeah. Or even better, base your ratings on your expectations of future episodes based on past episodes, but not this one.
That's called capitalization.
That's right. That's capitalization. That's a lesson.
And adjust it for risk, because we take a lot of risks, I think.
Yeah.
We took a risk here.
Boy, look how brave we are.
And that's why we deserve money.
So brave.
Because the people who get money are the ones who take the most risk.
Yes.
So that's us.
Responsible people.
That's what we're doing. Who also do a podcast about political economy and anime. Are you crazy?
This is
what?
Basically, we're heroes.
No, come on, man.
We're heroes.
Well, we did. So
yeah, we did it.
We took a big risk, and risk deserves reward. And that's really the lesson we're trying to teach here. So,
thanks for
Twitter,
listening.
at NeighborSidePod.
Yep.
I'm at Handle of Rye. Kris is at Solidarity_Goth. Also follow Peter. He might start posting again in the next couple months. He's at Book Cheekite.
Yeah.
We're going to try and get him back on the pod at some point.
That's right. We're going to smuggle him.
And hopefully he'll like give us the whole story of, what he's been doing for the past bunch of months. Mm-hmm. Be pretty interesting. He's going to give us some insights into business.
Yeah.
And it's his birthday today. So happy birthday, Peter.
Happy birthday, Peter.
Everyone wish him a happy birthday. Mm-hmm. By the time you hear us, it'll probably be like 3 days before, but I'm sure he'll still appreciate it. Mm-hmm. I think that's it. Yeah.
That's everything.
iTunes rating. Yeah.
Okay. Fucking do what you want.
Yeah.
It's anarchism.
Okay. Bye.
Bye.